By the time Wesley Hart stood in the county courtroom, nobody in Blackridge was calling him a hero anymore. They remembered the storm shelter first. They remembered the old community center on Laurel Road, the building families trusted when the power lines fell, when trailers flooded, when the creek rose too fast in the dark. Mothers carried sleeping children through its doors. Old men played cards beneath emergency lights. Volunteers handed out coffee and promised everyone they would be safe until morning. After that night, no one said that anymore. 4 people never came home. Several others survived, but not in any way that let them return to the lives they had before. Among the dead was Mrs. Alma Keene, the first person in Wesley's life to ever call him brave. The old dog that followed her everywhere, Buck, was lost in the same tragedy. Not because a dog mattered more than human lives, but because Buck had belonged to the woman who once believed Wesley was proof that broken boys could still grow into decent men. The prosecutor called Wesley dangerous. The papers called him a failed rescuer. But the jury could not forget the inspection tag still hanging beside the shelter door. Wesley Hart's signature was on it. So was the date. 3 days before the storm. And maybe that was the part that made him flinch. Not because the word dangerous made him innocent. It did not. Not because his childhood erased what happened on Laurel Road. It could not. But because it was not the first time Wesley had been told he ruined everything he touched. Trouble. Useless. A boy who only made things worse. At 14, Wesley Hart used to stand on the back porch of a sagging house in eastern Kentucky and listen to his parents tear each other apart behind the screen door. He did not pray for money, shoes, or a father who came home sober. He prayed for someone to need him. And years later, when being needed became the only thing that made him feel alive, Wesley crossed a line no storm could wash away. So the question was never whether Wesley Hart had suffered. He had. The question was how a boy desperate to be seen became a man willing to make people afraid just so they would look his way. The courtroom in Blackridge County was too small for what had happened. People stood along the back wall because there were not enough benches. Some held folded funeral programs. Some held nothing at all, because grief had taken even the habit of needing something to hold. On the left side sat the families of the 4 people who never walked out of the Laurel Road Community Center. On the right sat reporters, deputies, and townspeople who had once waved at Wesley Hart when his rescue truck passed by in the rain. Nobody waved now. Wesley sat at the defense table in a county-issued suit that did not fit his shoulders. His hands were folded in front of him, but they would not stay still. Every few seconds, one thumb rubbed the side of the other, the way he used to rub dirt from his palms after loading sandbags. It was a small, useless motion from a life now gone. The judge read the names slowly. Mrs. Alma Keene, Thomas Bell, Ruthie Mae Caldwell, Evan Briggs. Each name seemed to take something from the room. They were no longer just neighbors, mothers, brothers, card players, Sunday drivers, people who complained about heating oil and brought casseroles to sick friends. They were evidence now. They were counts. They were the reason Wesley Hart would never again stand behind a rescue table and tell frightened people they were safe. When Mrs. Alma Keene's name was read, Wesley looked down. Raylene Pike noticed. She sat 3 rows behind the prosecutor, wearing the dark blue jacket of the volunteer rescue squad without the patch on the sleeve. She had removed it after Laurel Road, not because she was ashamed of rescue work, but because she could no longer bear to wear the same symbol Wesley had used to make people trust him. Raylene had been the one who gave him that patch. Years earlier, she had seen something in Wesley that other people missed. Not goodness, exactly. Goodness was too easy a word. She had seen hunger, a boy grown into a man, still starving for someone to say his presence mattered. She had believed work could steady that hunger. Discipline, service, long nights checking radios without applause, honest reports, quiet repairs, responsibility that asked a man to do the right thing even when nobody was watching. For a while, Wesley had almost become that man. That was the part people hated to admit. He had carried water to old women during outages. He had pulled branches from roads before dawn. He had sat with scared children in the shelter and shown them how to count between thunder and lightning. There had been moments when his hands did good work. But a good act is not the same thing as a good soul. And a wounded childhood does not become a pardon just because the wound was real. The prosecutor stood beside a display board showing the inspection tag from Laurel Road. The plastic sleeve was scuffed, the ink bled at one corner, but Wesley's name was clear enough for everyone to see. Wesley Hart. 3 days before the storm. The prosecutor did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "This case is not about a man who failed to be perfect," he said. "It is about a man who had chances to tell the truth, understood what silence could cost, and chose himself anyway." Wesley closed his eyes. The word chose hit harder than monster. Monster sounded like something born wrong. Chose meant there had been doors. Chose meant he had seen them. Chose meant someone had reached for him, and he had pulled away because losing his place in other people's eyes felt worse than warning them in time. The judge spoke of danger, of trust, of a community shelter turned into a memorial. Wesley heard all of it, but beneath the legal words, another voice rose from farther back in his life. "Trouble. Useless. Boy, you make everything worse." And suddenly he was 14 again, standing barefoot on the back porch of a sagging house in eastern Kentucky, watching rain slide through a hole in the tin roof. Inside, his father was shouting, his mother was crying, or maybe laughing in that broken way she used when she had no strength left. Wesley stood with his hand on the screen door, waiting for someone to call his name. No one did. So he stayed there in the rain and listened to the house come apart, already learning the lesson that would ruin him. If nobody needed him, maybe he was not there at all. The house where Wesley Hart grew up sat at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud when it rained. From the outside, it did not look like the worst house in Blackridge. There were curtains in 2 windows, a rusted mailbox leaning toward the ditch, and weeds along the fence line. If someone drove past quickly, they might have mistaken it for a home that was tired. Inside, it felt like a place waiting to fall apart. The kitchen floor dipped near the sink. The hallway smelled of wet wood. In winter, plastic sheets covered the windows because the frames had warped and the wind came through in thin whistles. Wesley learned which step groaned, which cabinet stuck, and how to open soup without letting the lid clatter. Silence was not peace in the Hart house. Silence was survival. His father, Vernon Hart, had once worked underground. Men in town still talked about him as if the mine had swallowed the best part of him and sent the rest home angry. After the layoffs, Vernon spent afternoons at the gas station or in the recliner by the window. Some days he shouted. Some days he stared at Wesley like the boy was a bill he could not pay. Della Hart, Wesley's mother, moved through the house with the softness of someone trying not to wake an animal. She was not cruel. She made toast when there was bread. She washed his shirts in the bathtub when the machine broke. Sometimes, when Vernon was asleep, she touched Wesley's hair and called him baby in a voice so tired it sounded borrowed. Then she would disappear for 2 days. No note, no explanation. Just her coat gone from the hook and the bathroom light left on. When she came back, Vernon would shout. Della would say nothing. Wesley would sit on the floor of his room, counting the seconds between their voices. He did not count because he was calm. He counted because numbers gave shape to fear. If he could make it to 50, maybe nothing would break. If he could make it to 100, maybe his mother would remember him. At school, Wesley was the kind of boy teachers forgot until something went wrong. He wore the same jacket 3 winters in a row, even after the zipper broke. Other boys smelled smoke on his clothes and called him ashtray. Most people did not laugh at him. They looked past him. A guidance counselor named Mrs. Ellison once asked if everything was all right at home. Wesley stared at the floor and said yes. He had learned that yes ended conversations faster than the truth. The first wound did not happen on the loudest night in that house. There were worse nights. Nights when Vernon did not come back until morning. Nights when Della locked herself in the bathroom and would not answer. But the night that changed, Wesley was smaller on the outside. It began with rain. Not a storm anyone in town would remember. Just cold rain tapping the roof and filling the ditch beside the road. Vernon came home angry about money. Della had hidden cash behind the flour tin, money for the electric bill. Vernon found it. By 9 o'clock, the house had become the kind of place where every object seemed afraid of being touched. Wesley stood in the hallway, holding his breath. He was 14, old enough to know when things were getting worse, still young enough to believe an adult somewhere had the power to stop it. When Della said his name, not loudly, not even clearly, something in him moved before he could think. He ran, barefoot, without a coat, down the gravel road to the nearest porch light. The neighbors were the Grangers, an older couple who went to church every Sunday and waved from their truck. Wesley banged on their screen door until Mr. Granger opened it with the chain still latched. Rain ran down Wesley's face. His shirt stuck to his ribs. He tried to explain, but the words came out broken. His father, his mother, the shouting, the money, the way Della had said his name. Mr. Granger looked past him toward the Hart house. Then he sighed. "Go on back home, son," he said. "Your folks just get loud sometimes." Wesley did not move. Mrs. Granger appeared behind him in a bathrobe, worried but still behind the door. She asked if anyone was hurt. Wesley said he did not know. That was the truth. He only knew something was wrong enough to make his legs carry him through rain. Mr. Granger said they would make a call, but he said it the way people say things when they want a child to stop standing on their porch. By the time a deputy came, the house had gone quiet. Vernon was in the recliner. Della stood at the sink, washing a clean plate over and over. Wesley stood beside the stove with mud on his feet, while the deputy asked questions in a voice that already knew the answers it wanted. "Everybody all right here? Just a family argument? No need to make this bigger than it is?" Della nodded without looking at Wesley. Vernon gave a short laugh and said the boy had always been dramatic. That word stayed. Dramatic. Not scared. Not trying to help. Not a child who had run barefoot through cold rain because the house behind him felt like it was coming apart. Dramatic. The deputy left. The Grangers turned off their porch light. Vernon did not shout after that. He only looked at his son and shook his head. The next morning, Mrs. Ellison noticed the mud near Wesley's shoes. She asked again if everything was all right. This time, Wesley almost told her the plain truth. Then he remembered the chain on the Granger's door, the deputy's tired eyes, and his mother nodding at the sink. The truth had not saved anyone. It had only made him look foolish. So he changed it. He made the night sound sharper. He added details that had not happened. He made himself sound closer to danger than he had been. Mrs. Ellison's face changed as he spoke. She leaned forward. She wrote things down. For the first time in months, an adult did not look past Wesley Hart. She looked directly at him. That was the dangerous part. Wesley felt guilty. He knew some of the words leaving his mouth were not clean. He knew he was bending the truth into a shape that would make someone finally react. But he also felt relief. The story was not fully true. The fear underneath it was. In his 14-year-old mind, that seemed close enough. By the end of the day, people were saying his name. They spoke softly around him. Nothing truly changed at home. No one fixed the roof, the money, or the silence at dinner. But for one afternoon, Wesley mattered. And he learned the wrong lesson with the full force of a child who had waited too long to be protected. Pain by itself did not bring help. Fear had to be made loud enough. Truth had to be made useful. And if the world would not notice a quiet boy standing in the rain, then maybe the boy would have to become the kind of emergency no one could ignore. After the night at the Granger's porch, Wesley stopped believing that help came because a thing was true. Truth, by itself, had been too quiet. So he began watching what made adults move. A broken window got noticed faster than a quiet bruise. A rumor traveled farther than a confession. A boy who sat still with bad news in his throat could disappear for weeks, but a boy who made the office call home could change the air in a room before lunch. Wesley did not understand it as manipulation then. He was too young for that word and too lonely to survive it. He only understood cause and effect. When he told the plain version, people looked tired. When he sharpened the edges, they leaned closer. Blackridge did not offer many better lessons. The town had been built around work that was no longer there. Mine gates rusted. Storefronts on Main Street went dark. At the gas station, men who remembered steady paychecks talked about the past, like it was a country they had been forced to leave. At home, Vernon became smaller and meaner at the same time. He still filled the room, but not with strength. With resentment. He blamed the mine, the county, Della, the bills, the truck, the weather, and finally Wesley. The boy was too soft, too dramatic, too much like his mother. Not enough like anyone worth respecting. Della faded in a different way. She began leaving for longer stretches. At first it was evening, then 3, then nearly a week. She always came back with the same plastic grocery bag, the same tired eyes, the same promise that things were going to settle down soon. Wesley wanted to believe her, but by 15, he had started to recognize the smell of motel soap on her hand. One Friday afternoon, he saw her himself. He had skipped the last period of school and walked toward the highway because moving felt better than waiting. The motel sat behind a closed diner, its sign missing 2 letters. Della was standing outside room 6 with a cigarette between her fingers and her work shoes off. For a moment, Wesley did not feel angry. He felt relieved. She was alive. Not gone forever the way he feared every time her coat disappeared from the hook. Then she saw him. The shame on her face hurt worse than anger would have. She did not explain. She only said his name, the same way she had said it that rainy night, like she wanted him to save her and forgive her at the same time. Wesley walked away before she could ask him not to tell Vernon. He did not tell. That silence was one of his first adult choices, even if he was still a boy. He told himself he was protecting her. In truth, he was also punishing her. If she could hide from the house, then he could hide the truth from her too. A small, bitter power settled in him. After that, Wesley tried harder to become useful. He fixed the loose latch on Mrs. Granger's shed. He helped stack chairs after church suppers. He carried groceries when the road iced over. He learned how to patch a tire, jump a battery, reset a breaker, and clear leaves from a flooded ditch. People thanked him in passing, but their gratitude did not stay. Normal help vanished quickly. No one remembered the boy who fixed a hinge. They remembered the boy who found a problem before anyone else did. So Wesley started finding problems. At school, if a pipe knocked in the wall, he was the first to say it sounded dangerous. If a bus driver smelled gas near the garage, Wesley added that he had smelled it the day before, even when he had not. Sometimes he was right enough that teachers praised him. Sometimes he was wrong, and people rolled their eyes. But even eye rolls were a form of being seen. The first time his lie hurt someone else, it happened in shop class. A student named Tyler Boone had been making fun of Wesley's jacket for weeks. Tyler was not cruel in a memorable way. He was ordinary cruel, the kind of boy who laughed because others laughed and forgot the damage by the time the bell rang. One afternoon, a small electrical panel in the shop room sparked after Mr. Hanley shut off a drill. Nobody was hurt. Mr. Hanley checked the panel and told everyone to step back while he called maintenance. Wesley had seen Tyler near the wall earlier, flipping a switch he was not supposed to touch. That was true. What Wesley said next was not. When Mr. Hanley asked if anyone had been messing around, Wesley said he had seen Tyler forcing the panel open with a screwdriver. He said it clearly, calmly, like someone doing the responsible thing. Tyler denied it. His face went red. He looked more shocked than guilty, which should have made Wesley stop. It did not. Wesley kept his eyes on the teacher and let the story stand. The consequences were not enormous. Tyler got suspended for 2 days. His father had to leave work to come to school. Mr. Hanley told Wesley he had done the right thing by speaking up. The principal called him observant, observant. That word warmed him because it did not sound like pity. It sounded like value. Later, Wesley saw Tyler in the parking lot, sitting in his father's truck with his jaw clenched and his eyes wet. For a second, the truth pushed against Wesley's teeth. He could still tell Mr. Hanley he had made part of it bigger. He could still say Tyler had touched the switch, but not the panel. He did nothing. He told himself Tyler had deserved trouble for laughing at him. He told himself the panel had sparked anyway. He told himself no real harm had been done, but he knew something had changed. He had not lied because he was scared. He had lied because being believed felt good. That difference should have frightened him more than it did. By year's end, Della left for good. There was no speech, no suitcase scene, no final hug at the door. One morning her coat was gone, and this time it did not come back. Vernon said she had always been weak. Wesley said nothing. The silence between father and son became the only thing they shared. Home did not collapse all at once. It thinned. Dinner became whatever Wesley could heat. Bills turned into envelopes Vernon refused to open. The porch sagged lower. The roof leaked in 3 places. Wesley slept in jeans some nights because he never knew when he might have to leave quickly. But the deepest damage was not the poverty. It was the lesson taking shape underneath it. People did not stay because they loved you. They stayed when they needed something. They listened when you made the risk clear enough. They trusted the person who sounded certain in an emergency. And Wesley, young enough to be saved but old enough to choose wrong, began building himself around that belief. He did not want to be bad. Not yet. He wanted to matter. But he was learning to confuse those two things in ways that would one day cost other people far more than a 2-day suspension. By 20, Wesley Hart had become the kind of young man people called when something needed fixing, but not when something needed celebrating. He patched porch steps, hauled scrap metal, cleaned gutters, changed tires on the highway, and took cash and folded bills. He was useful in the way a wrench was useful. People were glad to have him nearby when something broke, but no one wondered where he went after it was working again. Vernon was still in the house at the end of the gravel road, though by then he seemed less like a father than a damaged piece of furniture. Della had not come back. Sometimes Wesley heard she was living 2 counties over. Sometimes he heard she had gone south. He never asked. Asking would mean admitting he still hoped the answer mattered. So Wesley built his life out of small emergencies. A stalled truck, a flooded ditch, a blown fuse, a tree limb across a driveway. On ordinary mornings, he felt hollow, but when a phone rang late or someone shouted his name from a parking lot, something inside him straightened. That was why the flood near Laurel Creek changed him. It came after 3 days of steady rain, the sort that sent brown water over low roads and made old porches look like boats tied to the hills. By evening, the creek had risen behind a row of houses where widows and retirees kept plastic chairs by their doors. Wesley was at the gas station when someone said Mrs. Alma Keene had not answered her phone. He knew the name. Everyone did. Alma Keene remembered birthdays, brought soup to sick neighbors, and still called grown men sweetheart if she had known them as boys. Her old dog, Buck, followed her everywhere with the patience of something that had learned her footsteps by heart. Wesley did not wait for instructions. He drove toward Laurel Creek in an old pickup with one working headlight. The road was already covered in places. He parked higher up and walked the rest of the way, water pushing cold against his legs. At Alma's house, the porch light flickered. He could hear Buck barking inside, steady and hoarse, as if the dog believed sound could hold the world together. Wesley forced the swollen door open with his shoulder and found Alma near the kitchen, one hand on the counter, trying to act less afraid than she was. The moment itself was not heroic the way people later told it. Wesley was scared. His hands shook. He snapped once when Alma moved too slowly, then hated himself for it. He carried her medication, helped her down the steps, and kept one hand under her elbow while Buck pressed against their legs. Twice, Wesley nearly slipped. Once, Alma whispered that she was sorry for being trouble. That word stopped him. Trouble. Standing in the cold water, with rain on his neck and Buck whining beside them, Wesley said, "You're not trouble, ma'am. You just need help." He did not know until later how badly he had wanted someone to say those words to him when he was 14. By the time he got Alma to higher ground, a few neighbors had gathered. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else took Buck by the collar. Alma kept hold of Wesley's sleeve. "You're a brave boy," she told him. "No dramatic. Not useless. Brave." The word went through Wesley so cleanly that for a moment he could not answer. It gave him a shape he had never been able to give himself. He was not the boy who made things worse. He was the man who came when others called. By morning, the story had already grown. At the diner, someone said Wesley had gone in waist-deep. At the gas station, someone said the door had been jammed shut and the creek was nearly over the windows. The county paper printed a short paragraph under the headline, "Local Man Helps Elderly Widow During Flood." It did not say much, but it said his name, Wesley Hart. He bought 3 copies and told himself it was for Alma, for Vernon, for the wall at the gas station. He kept one folded under his mattress. That was when Raylene Pike came to find him. She was captain of the Blackridge Volunteer Rescue Squad, a woman with gray in her braid and a voice that made people stand straighter. She had heard Wesley knew the back roads, could handle a truck in bad weather, and did not scare easily. "We could use someone like you," she said. For Wesley, that sounded almost like a door opening. The rescue station was nothing fancy. Cinder block walls, old radios, donated coats, folding tables, and a coffee pot that always smelled burned. But to Wesley, it felt cleaner than any church. Every object had a purpose. Every call had a reason. Every name written on the board belonged to someone who might be needed. Raylene did not praise him much. She taught him how to check supplies, read flood maps, test radios, and write what happened exactly as it happened. "A report is not a campfire story," she told him. "If you make yourself bigger in it, you make somebody else less safe." Wesley nodded. He meant to listen, but when people asked about Alma, the story pulled at him. The plain version felt too small for what the word brave had done inside his chest. So he added pressure to the water. He made the door heavier. He let people believe he had known exactly what to do. Raylene heard it too. She did not embarrass him in public. She waited until they were alone in the supply room and said, "You did good work, Wesley. Don't poison it by needing it to sound better than it was." His face burned. For 1 second, he could have said she was right. Instead, he laughed softly and told her people always made stories bigger than they were. Raylene looked at him for a long moment. "People do," she said. "Rescuers can't." That warning should have become a foundation. For Wesley, it became a bruise. He kept showing up. Part of him really did want to help. That was what made the fall so hard to see at first. But another part of him had tasted something stronger than gratitude. He had heard his name spoken with relief. And once Wesley knew what that felt like, ordinary silence began to feel like punishment. Raylene Pike did not treat the rescue squad like a place for heroes. She treated it like a place for people who knew how easily others could die when someone got careless. That was the first thing Wesley learned after he joined. The station was only a low cinder block building beside the county road with 2 aging trucks under a metal awning. But inside, Raylene ran it with a severity Wesley had never seen at home. Every flashlight had a place. Every radio was tested. Every blanket was counted, folded, and logged. Every report had to say what happened, not what someone wished had happened. Wesley liked the order. He liked the hooks on the wall, the labeled shelves, the smell of coffee and wet canvas, the county map beside the dispatch desk. The station made the world feel readable. Roads had names. Creeks had flood marks. Danger had procedures. For a man raised in a house where fear arrived without warning, that order felt almost holy. Raylene gave him small jobs first. He restocked first aid kits, swept mud from the truck bay, checked batteries, and carried bottled water into shelters before heavy rain. He showed up early. He stayed late. When older volunteers dismissed him as the Keen Kid's flood boy, Wesley swallowed the insult and kept working. He wanted Raylene to see he could be more than a story from the paper. Sometimes she did. After a long night clearing fallen branches from Route 16, Raylene handed him burned coffee and said, "You're steady when people panic." It was not praise the way Alma Keen's brave had been praise. It was plainer than that. He should have trusted it more. But Wesley had never learned how to live on plain things. A few weeks later, Pastor Miles Grady offered him a maintenance job at the church. It came with regular hours, a small paycheck, and a room behind the fellowship hall until he could afford his own place. Pastor Miles was trying to give him a life that did not depend on rain, sirens, and frightened people. Wesley thanked him and said he would think about it. He barely did. The job sounded peaceful, and peace still felt too much like being forgotten. Fixing church lights and mowing grass might keep him alive, but it would not make anyone say his name with relief. The rescue squad did that. When the radio cracked to life, the room changed. Men who had ignored him turned their heads. Raylene reached for the map. Someone tossed him keys. In those moments, Wesley became necessary. Not loved, not fully known, but necessary. He began to crave that difference. Raylene noticed before he did. She noticed how restless he became during slow weeks, how often he checked the radio, how quickly he stepped forward when citizens came in with small concerns. She did not shame him for wanting to help. She had seen plenty of lonely men confuse usefulness with salvation. But she warned him, "Most rescue work is boring," she told him while they inventoried storm cots. "If you need it to feel exciting, you'll start making bad calls." Wesley smiled like he understood. Inside, he felt reduced. A month later, a minor call came in from a trailer park near Mill Road. A woman smelled something burning near her breaker box. By the time the squad arrived, the problem was small. An overloaded outlet, caught early, no fire, no injury. Raylene handled it calmly. Wesley helped carry equipment and kept the woman's grandson busy outside. It was good work. That should have been enough. In the report, Wesley wrote that the family had been minutes away from losing the trailer. He described smoke that had not been there. He made his own response sound quicker and more decisive than it had been. The changes were not wild. They were small, careful, believable. That was what made them dangerous. Raylene called him into the supply room the next morning and placed the report on the table. "Read me the second paragraph," she said. Wesley read it. Then she asked, "Is that what happened?" He looked past her at the coils of rope, the gloves, the stacked water bottles, all the objects that belonged because they were useful. He could have told the truth. He could have said he got carried away. He could have let embarrassment teach him something. Instead, he shrugged. Close enough. Raylene's face changed. Not with rage. With disappointment so controlled, it frightened him. Close enough gets people hurt, she said. A report is how the next person knows what they're walking into. If you make the danger bigger to make yourself bigger, you train everybody to stop trusting the paper. Wesley felt heat rise in his neck. You act like I lied about helping. I'm saying you helped, Raylene said, and then you damaged it. That sentence found the softest place in him. Damaged it. He heard Vernon in it. The boy who could not touch anything without making it worse. The man whose good work still came back dirty. For a moment, shame almost became honesty. Then pride stepped in front of it. Wesley gave a short laugh and said people wanted paperwork cleaner than real life. Raylene told him to rewrite the report before the end of shift. He did. He also stayed late and restocked 2 shelves no one had asked him to touch, hoping she would notice. She did not say thank you. That hurt more than it should have. After that, Wesley began dividing the work into 2 kinds. The public kind, where people saw the truck, the uniform, the hands reaching for them, and the invisible kind, where a man checked batteries, corrected forms, folded blankets, and went home without anyone knowing his name. Raylene believed the invisible work mattered most. Wesley believed her on the surface. But deeper down, the old lesson kept breathing. If no one saw the rescue, did it count? The door back to a decent life was open then. Raylene was holding it. Pastor Miles had offered another one. Even Jonah Reed, an old-school acquaintance who drove a tow truck, told Wesley that steady work and a quiet apartment were not the same as failure. Wesley heard them all. He simply did not trust a life that quiet. So he kept the uniform. He kept the radio near his bed. He kept chasing the moment when fear entered a room and everyone looked to him for what came next. The first time Wesley realized the rescue squad was not as clean as Raylene wanted it to be, he felt betrayed. Then he felt relieved. It happened during a county funding meeting in a windowless room behind the courthouse, where every department came asking for money that did not exist. The sheriff wanted tires. The school wanted roof repairs. The library wanted enough to stay open 4 days a week. By the time Raylene stood to speak for the rescue squad, the commissioners already looked exhausted. Wesley sat against the wall in uniform, proud to be there. Raylene brought call logs, flood maps, and photographs from recent storms. She explained what the squad needed: radios that worked past the ridge, fuel money, replacement cots, and a generator that did not cough itself dead after 2 hours. One commissioner rubbed his forehead and said, "Everybody needs something, Raylene." That was when Clint Harrow stood up. Clint was one of the older volunteers, a broad man with the easy confidence of someone who had been thanked too many times to question himself. He spoke about near tragedies, critical gaps, and lives that would have been lost if the squad had not acted fast. Some of what he said was true. Some of it had been polished until it shone brighter than the facts. Wesley knew because he had been on 2 of the calls Clint described. One stranded family had been standing safely on their porch when the truck arrived. One washed-out road had been passable by morning. The danger had been real, but not as large as Clint made it sound. The commissioners listened. They leaned forward. By the end of the meeting, the squad got more than Raylene expected. In the parking lot, Raylene was furious. "You don't build safety with inflated numbers," she told Clint. Clint only shrugged. "You build it with money. The county doesn't pay for maybe. It pays for almost dead." Wesley stood there, holding a box of handouts, feeling something inside him shift. For months, Raylene had told him a report had to be exact because people depended on it. Yet here was Clint, bending the truth in public and getting rewarded for it. The lesson slipped into Wesley before he could stop it. Maybe truth was not sacred. Maybe it was just weak when it came alone. At first, he used that thought only to defend himself in private. When Raylene corrected a detail, Wesley thought of commissioners leaning forward only when danger sounded large enough to scare them. Soon it began changing the way he wrote. A blocked culvert became a serious drainage failure. A delayed response became a near miss. A household that refused evacuation became proof that residents needed stronger emergency oversight. Each sentence had a little truth inside it. That was how Wesley excused the rest. Then Nora Bell came to the station. She lived in the low ground beyond Laurel Road, in a row of cheap houses where water collected before it reached the creek. She brought photographs, water against porch steps, mold on baseboards, mud lines on a child's bicycle. Her brother used a wheelchair. Her mother slept with an oxygen machine. When the road flooded, leaving was not simple. Raylene listened carefully. Wesley did too, though not for the same reason. Nora was frightened, and frightened people made him feel necessary. She looked at him when she spoke, because she had seen him on calls, because people in town had started to treat Wesley as someone who could get things done. That look fed the part of him Raylene kept trying to starve. "We'll review the shelter routes," Raylene said. "And I want the Laurel Road inspection checked again before storm season." Wesley offered to handle the paperwork. Raylene hesitated. Then she nodded. The review should have been simple. Wesley had older inspection forms, maintenance notes, and hazard complaints. None of it said the community center was unsafe by itself. But together, the papers showed a pattern. Drainage problems, old wiring, one back exit that stuck in damp weather, repeated warnings from residents downhill. Not a disaster. Not yet. But not nothing. Wesley knew the difference mattered. He also knew that if he wrote the report strongly enough, Raylene would push for a temporary closure, the county would ask why earlier forms had missed so much, and people would look back through recent paperwork. They would see his name. They might stop trusting him before he had become too important to lose. So he softened what should have been clear. He did not erase Nora's concerns. He reduced them. He did not say the shelter was perfect. He called it serviceable. He marked several issues as recommended follow-up rather than immediate concern. The language looked professional, calm, defensible. That was worse than a wild lie. A careful lie sits quietly inside a file and waits for the future to lean on it. When Wesley signed the assessment, his hand paused over the page. He thought of Nora's photographs. He thought of Raylene's warning. He thought of Alma Keene gripping his sleeve in floodwater and calling him brave. Then he signed anyway. 3 days later, Nora saw him outside the grocery store and asked if the shelter review had helped. Wesley could have told her the truth. He could have said Raylene should see the full risk, that her family deserved better than soft language in a hard season. Instead, he smiled and told her they were looking into it. Nora thanked him. That was the part that followed him home. Not her anger, not suspicion, her gratitude. He sat that night with the radio beside his bed and felt the first clean edge of real guilt. He had not lied because he was a scared boy. He had not lied because Tyler Boone mocked his jacket. He had lied because the truth threatened the place he had made for himself. Raylene found the inconsistencies 2 weeks later. She compared notes, asked questions, and drove to Nora's road after a rain. By the time she looked at Wesley across the dispatch desk, something in her face had hardened. "You knew this was bigger than the report said," she told him. Wesley heard the door of his new life begin to close. And instead of reaching for honesty, he reached for the oldest tool he had. He made himself sound necessary. "If I wrote it the way you wanted," he said, "they would shut half this town down and still not fix a thing. People listen to me out there. They trust me. You want to lose that because of wording?" Raylene stared at him. "That's not service," she said. "That's using scared people to protect yourself." The words landed exactly where they were supposed to. Wesley felt guilt, sharp and immediate, then shame, then anger rushing in to cover both. By the time he left the station, he had already begun rewriting the moment in his mind. Raylene was too rigid. The county was too broken. Nora would not understand the pressure. Nobody understood what it took to keep people looking to him when everything else in Blackridge was falling apart. The lie was no longer just on paper. It had entered the way Wesley explained himself to himself. And once a man learns to call self-protection service, almost any line can begin to look crossable. After Raylene accused him of using scared people to protect himself, Wesley should have stopped. That was the last moment when shame still had a chance to become honesty. Instead, he carried the accusation around like an injury. For the next few weeks, he worked harder than anyone at the station. He cleaned equipment before being asked. He answered calls no one else wanted. He drove out to check on elderly residents after hard rain and made sure people saw him doing it. He brought bottled water to Nora Bell's road and stood long enough for neighbors to come outside and thank him. From the outside, it looked like repentance. Inside, it was something else. Wesley was not trying to become smaller and more truthful. He was trying to become too useful to question. And for a while, it worked. Blackridge had always been a town where official systems arrived late. People called the county and got recordings. They called landlords and got excuses. They called repair companies and heard prices they could not pay. But if they called Wesley Hart, he usually came. He fixed a widow's porch light after a windstorm. He drove insulin across a flooded low road. He checked on a man whose trailer heater failed in a cold snap. He knew which roads dipped first, which families had no car, which old men would refuse evacuation until someone looked them in the face. People began calling him before they called the station. That should have worried him. Instead, it filled him. Each call told him he mattered. Each thank you pushed Raylene's warning farther away. When someone said, "We knew you'd come," Wesley felt a warmth that was almost love. Except, love did not usually arrive with panic in its hands. Slow weeks became unbearable. On quiet afternoons, he sat near the radio even when he was off duty. He checked weather reports with the hunger of a man reading for his own name. Blue skies made him restless. Clear roads made him feel unused. The ordinary safety of other people began to feel like a room where he had not been invited. Raylene saw the change. She saw how he stayed too close to frightened residents, how he let them depend on him personally instead of directing them back to the squad. She saw how he described minor risks in ways that made people look to him for permission to breathe. Nothing he did was dramatic enough to remove him outright. That was part of the problem. Wesley had learned to make his need look like service. One evening, after a downed tree call that had never been as dangerous as Wesley made it sound over the radio, Raylene told him to stay behind. The station was nearly empty. Rainwater ticked from the trucks under the awning. A pot of old coffee burned on the warmer. Raylene placed 3 reports on the table. "Tell me why your calls always sound worse when you're the one writing them," she said. Wesley looked at the pages. He saw his own careful language. Possible entrapment. Severe access concern. Critical delay risk. Words that could be defended one at a time, but together made him seem central to every close call in town. "You want me to make things sound safe when they're not?" he asked. "I want you to tell the truth. The truth is people out there trust me." Raylene's face tightened. "That's exactly what scares me." The sentence should have slowed him down. Instead, it opened something mean. He told her she did not understand the low roads because she lived on higher ground. He told her people like Nora Bell listened to him because he did not talk to them like paperwork. He said the squad needed him, whether Raylene liked admitting it or not. He knew he was twisting the issue. He knew Raylene was not attacking the poor. She was trying to protect them from a man who had begun to enjoy being their only answer. But knowing did not stop him. By then, Wesley had learned a dangerous kind of self-defense. If someone challenged his honesty, he made it sound like they were challenging the people he claimed to serve. Raylene let him finish. Then she said, "You're hiding behind them." For a second, he hated her because she was right. Then he hated her because she had said it out loud. That night, Wesley drove to the edge of town instead of going home. He parked beside the closed laundromat where the vending machines still glowed in the window. Jonah Reed found him there near midnight, leaning against the truck with the radio on the hood. Jonah had known Wesley since school, but they had never been close. He drove a tow truck now, worked steady hours, and lived in a small apartment above his cousin's garage. There was nothing impressive about Jonah's life, and that was exactly what made Wesley uncomfortable around him. Jonah did not need a siren to prove he existed. "You look like a man waiting for bad weather," Jonah said. Wesley laughed without humor. "Maybe bad weather's the only time this place tells the truth." Jonah leaned beside him and looked at the empty road. "Or maybe it's the only time you know what to do with yourself." That made Wesley turn. Jonah did not back away. He said Raylene had called him, not to gossip, but because she was worried. He said Wesley could step back for a while, work with him on the tow truck, make normal money, sleep at night. Let the squad breathe without him. Wesley heard the kindness in it. That made it worse. A cruel man could be dismissed. A kind man offering an ordinary life was harder to forgive. "Dragging cars out of ditches is your idea of a future?" Wesley asked. "It's a living. It's disappearing." Jonah looked at him for a long time. "No, it's just living without needing everybody scared first." Wesley pushed off the truck and told him to go home. But after Jonah drove away, the words stayed. Living without needing everybody scared first. He sat there until the radio battery died, feeling the insult of a quiet night. Somewhere in town, people were sleeping safely. No one was calling him. No one was asking where he was. No one needed his hands. For most people, that would have been peace. For Wesley, it felt like erasure. The next morning, he apologized to Raylene, but only in the shape of an apology. He said he had been under pressure. He said he cared too much. He said people depended on him, and sometimes that made him intense. Raylene listened with tired eyes. She did not accept the words as much as she allowed him one more chance to prove them. That mercy should have humbled him. Instead, Wesley took it as evidence that she still could not afford to lose him. By the end of that week, he was back on calls. Quieter, more careful, less obvious. But inside him, something had hardened. He no longer wanted only to help in emergencies. He wanted the emergencies to confirm what he had always believed, that Blackridge was safest when it looked toward him. And when a man starts needing fear to prove his worth, service becomes a costume. The rescuer remains visible. The rescue begins to disappear. The storm that would change Blackridge did not arrive like a monster. It arrived first as a forecast, a red line on a weather map, a county alert, a warning from the radio that Laurel Creek could rise fast if the rain stalled over the ridge. People talked about it at the diner, gas station, and church parking lots, the way small towns discuss danger before they know whether to fear it. Raylene Pike did not dismiss it. 2 days before the worst of the rain, she spread maps across the dispatch table and began checking everything again. Road access, shelter supplies, radio batteries, volunteer lists, backup routes. The Laurel Road Community Center sat in the middle of those papers like an old promise the town had made to itself. A safe place. That was what everyone called it. Raylene no longer trusted that phrase. She had been reviewing Wesley's reports for weeks, not because she wanted to catch him, but because trust had become too expensive to give him without checking. The more she compared dates, complaints, and inspection notes, the more the language changed shape in front of her. Serviceable. Recommended follow-up. No immediate concern. Soft words. Do soft. By dusk, she found the inspection tag copy with Wesley's signature on it. Then she found Nora Bell's photographs clipped behind an older complaint. When Wesley came in, his jacket was wet at the shoulders. He looked at the maps first, then at the paper in Raylene's hand. Raylene placed the tag on the table between them. "Tell me what I'm looking at," she said. Wesley swallowed. "A shelter review." "No," Raylene said. "Tell me what I'm really looking at." The station was quiet except for rain ticking against the windows and the low hiss of the radio. Outside, volunteers moved supplies into the trucks. Inside, Wesley felt the room narrowing around him. He could still choose right. That was the cruelty of it. The door had not fully closed. Raylene was not shouting. She had not called the sheriff. She was giving him what he had always claimed no one gave him as a child. A chance to tell the truth before the damage became permanent. Wesley looked down at his signature. "It needed repairs," he said. Raylene waited. "The back exit sticks when it's damp. The drainage behind the building is worse than the county file says. Nora's road floods faster than the model shows. The wiring isn't failed, but it's old. If we get too many people in there and lose power, it could be bad." Raylene's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "How bad?" Wesley understood exactly what she was asking. If he answered honestly, Raylene would move people. She would call the county. She would close Laurel Road if she had to. Commissioners would ask why the tag had been signed. Reporters would find the paperwork. His name would not be spoken with relief anymore. It would be spoken with suspicion. He thought of Mrs. Alma Keene, who still trusted that shelter because she trusted the people who ran toward trouble. He thought of Nora Bell's brother and the oxygen machine beside her mother's bed. Then he thought of Raylene taking the uniform from him. "Not bad enough to start moving everybody tonight," he said. It was not a full lie. That was how he survived saying it. Raylene looked at him for a long time. "Are you certain?" The right answer pressed against his mouth. "No. No. I softened the report. No. I was afraid of what people would think. No. You need to act now." "Instead," Wesley said, "I'm certain we can manage it." The words landed softly. That made them worse. Raylene stepped away from the table. She was not convinced, but emergency work was always a war against time, money, and incomplete information. If Wesley had given her the full truth, she would have had enough to move the shelter plan immediately. What he gave her was concern without confession, risk without ownership. She ordered extra supplies moved to the high school gym as a backup. She reassigned 2 volunteers to check Laurel Road through the night. She told Wesley he was off public-facing duty until she finished reviewing every file he had touched. That was the moment he should have accepted punishment as mercy. Instead, he heard exile. "You're benching me before the storm?" he asked. "I'm keeping people safe. People out there know me. That's not a qualification anymore." The sentence struck harder than she intended. Wesley's face changed, not into anger first, but into hurt so naked Raylene almost softened. "Almost. You don't get to make this about your feelings," she said. "If you lied on that tag, say it now." He looked at the paper again. His signature sat there like a door handle. All he had to do was turn it. "I didn't lie," he said. "I made a judgment call." Raylene's disappointment finally broke through her control. "A judgment call protects people," she said. "This protected you." For one breath, Wesley saw it clearly. He saw himself standing between frightened people and the truth they deserved, and he knew which side he had chosen. The knowledge almost brought him to his knees, but almost is not repentance. He left the station before he could say anything that might save him. In the parking lot, rain gathered in his collar. He stood beside his truck, shaking, listening to the radio chatter from inside. For a moment, he reached for the door. He could go back. He could tell Raylene everything. Then a volunteer laughed somewhere in the bay, and another voice asked where Wesley had gone. The question sounded casual, harmless, ordinary. That was what broke him. The storm was coming, and the room was already learning to move without him. Wesley lowered his hand. Behind him, the station lights glowed warm in the rain. Ahead of him, Blackridge waited for weather. Families would pack blankets. Old people would check flashlights. Children would be told not to be afraid. And Wesley Hart, who had once wanted to be the man they called when fear came, drove away knowing he had left them with only part of the truth. That was his last real chance. Not because no one tried after that. Because after that, Wesley started treating rescue as something being stolen from him. And a man who believes salvation has been stolen can convince himself that almost anything is only taking it back. By the next morning, Raylene Pike had stopped trying to save Wesley quietly. She had spent the night going through every file his hands had touched. Shelter reviews, road notes, flood complaints, supply logs. Small changes that might have looked harmless alone began forming a pattern. The danger was not only that Wesley had been wrong, people were wrong in rescue work. Weather shifted, judgment calls got made. The danger was that Wesley had protected himself first, then called it service. At 7:15, she called him into the station. Rain had not started hard yet, but the sky carried that green-gray weight people in Blackridge understood. Volunteers loaded blankets, lanterns, water, and folding cots. Everyone was tired before the storm arrived. Wesley walked in expecting another private warning. Instead, Raylene was waiting beside the dispatch desk with Deputy Carl Voss, 2 senior volunteers, and the folder from Laurel Road. That was when Wesley understood this would not be mercy disguised as discipline. This would be public. Raylene did not raise her voice. That almost made it worse. "You are off the active roster," she said. "Effective now." For a second, Wesley thought he had misheard her. "We have a storm coming." "I know. You need people. I need people I can trust." The room went still. Wesley looked at the other volunteers, waiting for one of them to object. No one did. Clint Harrow looked away. Deputy Voss kept his eyes on the folder. The radio hissed behind them, indifferent to the fact that Wesley's life was being cut open in front of everyone. Raylene held out her hand. "Your radio and your jacket." The jacket was hanging from Wesley's arm. Dark blue. County patch. Blackridge Volunteer Rescue Squad across the back. It was only fabric, but to Wesley it felt like the only proof that he had become more than the boy at the end of the gravel road. He did not hand it over. Raylene stepped closer, not angry now, only final. "You are not a rescuer right now, Wesley," she said. "You are a danger in a uniform." There it was. Danger. The word moved through him like a door slamming in an old house. For a moment, he was not standing in the rescue station. He was back in every room. He was back in every room where someone had decided he made things worse. Vernon shaking his head. The deputy calling him dramatic. Teachers watching him with doubt after truth and lies became too tangled to separate. Wesley's mouth went dry. He wanted to say Raylene had no right. He wanted to say he had given this town more than anyone in that room. He wanted to say they would remember him when the creek rose and the phone started ringing. What he should have said was, "I lied." He did not. He dropped the radio on the desk hard enough to make one volunteer flinch. Then he pulled off the jacket and threw it across a chair. "There," he said. "Now you can all be safe without me." No one answered. That silence followed him into the parking lot. The storm began as he drove. Not violent yet. Just steady rain, the kind that erased distance from the windshield and turned familiar roads into gray ribbons. Wesley passed the church, the closed diner, the motel where Della had once hidden. For a moment, he thought of driving to Jonah Reed's garage. Jonah would be there. Jonah would hand him a towel, tell him to sit down, maybe say nothing until Wesley could breathe. Jonah would give him the ugliest kind of mercy, ordinary mercy, the kind that did not need him to be brave, important, or necessary. Wesley slowed near the turn. Then he kept driving. He could have gone back to Raylene. He could have called Deputy Voss. He could have warned Nora Bell to take her family to the high school gym. He could have knocked on Alma Keene's door and said the shelter was not the promise people thought it was. There were still doors. That was the part the jury would later have to understand. Not excuses. Doors. Wesley saw them and walked past them. By evening, Laurel Creek was rising. The community center opened. Families arrived with blankets, pill bottles, phone chargers, and children wearing pajamas under raincoats. Volunteers moved people inside. The high school gym was prepared as backup, but Laurel Road was still the place most people trusted first. Wesley sat in his truck above town and listened to radio chatter on an old spare receiver he should not have kept. At first, his name did not come up. That hurt more than panic would have. The squad worked without him. Raylene gave orders. Volunteers answered. People were moved, checked, counted. Blackridge was afraid, and still the town had not collapsed because Wesley was missing. The old wound opened wider than reason. He told himself Raylene had humiliated him. He told himself they were using his work while pretending he had no value. He told himself they would understand soon, not because he wanted anyone hurt, he insisted, because they needed to know what it meant to push away the one man who had always come when called. It was a lie with grief inside it. That made it easier to believe. What happened next would later be pieced together through timelines, calls, missed warnings, and the choices Wesley did not undo. The story does not need the mechanics to be clear. The moral fact is enough. Wesley had chances to interrupt what was unfolding. He did not take them. The rain thickened. The creek rose. Radio voices sharpened from procedure into fear. Somewhere in the noise, Laurel Road stopped being just another shelter call and became the night Blackridge would never speak of in a normal tone again. Wesley heard his name at last, not with relief, not as the man who knew what to do. A deputy said it first, asking where Wesley Hart was. For years, Wesley had wanted a whole town to need him. On Laurel Road, they finally did. But by then, needing him had become another word for being afraid of what he had chosen not to stop. When the trial returned to the courtroom, Blackridge no longer needed to decide whether Wesley Hart had suffered. That part was known. Witnesses had spoken about the house at the end of the gravel road, his father, his mother, and the neglect that shaped him. Raylene Pike had described the young man who came early, stayed late, carried supplies, and once looked almost saved by the work. The defense wanted those pieces to matter. They did matter, just not the way Wesley needed them to. Pain could explain the wound. It could not erase what the wound had done to other people, once Wesley chose to protect it with lies. Raylene took the stand on the last morning before sentencing. She did not look at Wesley. She looked at the families. The Bells, the Caldwells, the Briggs brothers sitting shoulder to shoulder. Mrs. Alma Keene's niece, holding the folded funeral program as if opening it again would make the loss final. The prosecutor asked Raylene whether she believed Wesley had ever wanted to help people. "Yes," she said. A murmur moved through the room. Raylene waited. "He wanted to help," she continued. "But somewhere along the way, he started needing people to need him more than he needed them to live." Wesley closed his eyes. That sentence did not sound angry. That was what made it impossible to fight. Raylene was not trying to make him look like a monster. She was telling the truth in a voice that still remembered the man he might have become. Then Alma's niece spoke. She told the court that her aunt had kept extra blankets in her trunk every winter because she believed somebody always needed one. She said Alma had once called Wesley a brave boy and meant it. She said Buck, the old dog, had slept at Alma's feet during church suppers, storm meetings, and card games at the community center. No one pretended Buck's name belonged beside the human dead, but when the niece said the dog had followed Alma into every place she trusted, the courtroom understood why that detail hurt. It was not about comparing losses. It was about the size of what Wesley had broken. Even the small, innocent things attached to safety had not come through Laurel Road untouched. When Wesley was allowed to speak, he stood slowly. For a moment, it looked as if he might try to explain himself again. The old reflex was there. To make the story sharper where it helped him, softer where it condemned him, useful where truth alone would not save him. But the room was past being shaped by him. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. Some families looked away. One man shook his head. Raylene stared down at her hands. Wesley wanted the apology to travel backward. He wanted it to reach Nora Bell before she thanked him outside the grocery store. He wanted it to reach Raylene before she asked whether he was certain. He wanted it to reach Alma before she walked toward a shelter with his signature by the door. But remorse has no authority over time. The judge waited until Wesley sat down. Then he read the sentence. Life without the possibility of parole. The words entered the room without drama. There was no gasp, no clean feeling of justice arriving. A sentence could remove Wesley from the streets. It could name what he had done. It could tell the families the law had not looked away. But it could not return 4 people to their kitchens, porches, churches, and morning routines. The judge said Wesley had been failed as a child by people who should have protected him. That failure was real. Then he said the law could not allow a wounded man to turn other people's fear into proof of his own worth. Wesley had been given chances to tell the truth. He had been offered discipline, work, mercy, friendship, and ordinary life. At each narrowing door, he chose the version of himself that needed to be central, even when others needed to be safe. The gavel fell. That was the end of the case. It was not the end of Laurel Road. The community center never reopened as a shelter. For months, plywood covered the windows. Later, the county placed a memorial marker near the front steps. It was not large or polished, just 4 names. Alma Keen's favorite hymn. People still drove past it on their way to work. Some slowed down. Some did not look. Raylene stayed with the rescue squad, but reports changed. No one person signed a loan anymore. No single name was allowed to become a town's promise. Nora Bell moved her mother and brother to higher ground after a church fundraiser. Jonah Reed kept towing cars from ditches and never once called that life small. Wesley disappeared into prison, where no siren made him necessary and no frightened town waited for his hands. Years later, a reporter asked whether he thought Blackridge had made him what he became. Wesley did not answer right away. Maybe he finally understood that the question was too easy. Blackridge had shaped the wound. Vernon had deepened it. Della had left it open. Poverty, silence, and neglect had taught a boy terrible lessons. But Wesley Hart had chosen what to do with those lessons. And the names on Laurel Road remained after every explanation. Mrs. Alma Keen, Thomas Bell, Ruthie Mae Caldwell, Evan Briggs. The story of Wesley Hart was not about a monster born in the dark. It was worse than that. It was the story of a man who found a door back to the light more than once, then kept choosing the shadow because the shadow made people look his way. Understanding where the darkness began does not mean forgiving what it became.